comes up in this area. So now I just wanted to turn your attention to the case studies that I've printed out. And firstly, the calling our first man Bernie was not deliberate, but as Bernie said, you probably all get a chuckle out of it. So does someone want to volunteer to read that out? Or I can get the ball rolling? That'd be great. Yes, that'd be great.
Okay, so Bernie is admitted to Waterview Aged Care from hospital for emergency respite after a fall. Has a four-wheel walker, little information obtained and no one visited Bernie at hospital to assess him. Waterview Aged Care asked hospital and family for information about Bernie's history, but little information was given. Waterview staff are told Bernie was living independently with a little bit of family support, although he has some short-term memory loss. Waterview asked family to provide more information so that they can do the assessment. No information arrives before Bernie's admission. Arrives at the facility and is admitted around 2:30 p.m. At around 5 p.m, Bernie pushes over a resident and she breaks her hip. Bernie then rams his four-wheel walker into a staff member, then goes into his room, which is in the low care section of the facility. It's not part of the secure unit. At around 6:30, staff discover Bernie is not in his room or elsewhere. They immediately raise the alarm. Shortly after the police contact the facility, Bernie was found wandering along Main Street, causing havoc on the roads and placing himself in danger. Waterview later found out that Bernie has a history of wandering, aggressive behaviour, and that he suffers from severe dementia and PTSD.
Thank you. So I wanted to use Bernie to talk about issues around duty of care. So I think the words duty of care are often thrown around and we hear that as a justification, for example, for why we might restrain someone or give them certain medication. But I just thought I'd get a sense of you. Who do you think Waterview owes a duty of care to in this scenario?
Bernie.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other residents.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm just write this down. So we've got Bernie, other resident. Yep. Another group of people that they may actually owe a duty of care to too, which is a little bit, it's less obvious, but is also people, if Bernie's wandering along the road, he may actually cause a car accident. So we've got also the public in this as well, so, or road users or pedestrians even, so. So it's quite a broad group of people that we owe a duty of care to here. But I think the real question is, have we breached that duty of care? So there's three, so for someone to sue in negligence, and that's the cause of action that would generally apply here, there may also be contractual issues because they've agreed to provide Bernie with care, he may have rights under that, but they'll be generally reflective of the same as negligence. But so there's three elements. The first is that there's a duty of care, that it's been breached, and that the breach has caused damage. So for example, for this other lady who's been pushed over, she could say, well, you owe a duty of care to me to provide me with a safe environment, and Bernie's injured me, he's caused me damage, and so you breached your duty of care to me. But really what's key is that you have to assess someone's actions against what standard is reasonable. Yeah. So here, this facility didn't really know much about Bernie when he was admitted. Perhaps they should have gotten some more information, but you know, often these things it's hard. The hospital's saying we really need you to take him, and you can't get enough information out of them. You had no information to think he was going to do these things. So.
But if the hospital knew that about him, they should have passed that information on.
Yeah, they should have, but I'm sure it's happened before that the hospitals don't always give you everything.
But normally, like, they send the ECHAR paperwork. Without ECHAR, we can't admit anyone. According to the law.
And say to the hospital that you've reached duty of care, because you should provide us with more information about his behaviours and about.
But I think the facility should not accept
That didn't-
it.
Yeah, in the first case,
Yeah.
without the
But then
full-
we have to not to tag him in as well, I think, when we don't have enough.
Yeah, that's what we said, like, we can refuse to take that action.
Yeah, that's exactly right. But when this has all happened and the court's looking at it, they may actually say, well, really, maybe perhaps you should have gotten that information, but we don't think you've breached your duty of care here because really you haven't done anything that's unreasonable. You've done what many reasonable aged care providers would have done in the same situation. I think though, imagine it was 6 months down the track, you already knew about these behaviours and the same thing happened. I think that would be a very different scenario. They would say, no, you haven't been reasonable because you haven't, well, depending on what interventions were put in place, if you had, put in all of the behaviour management and say, citing, charts and the like, then you probably would be considered to have acted reasonably. But the other thing is too, the law generally doesn't say that we have to prevent other people from harming others. So there's been quite a bit of case law around this. And for example, parents don't have an obligation to prevent their kids from running out on the road and causing a car accident. It's quite surprising when you think of it in that way. But same with here, even though Bernie can't make decisions for himself, that doesn't mean that the aged care facility is then responsible for the harm that Bernie causes on the road. There are some sort of exceptions to that rule. For example, there was a case involving juvenile delinquents and they escaped from a facility and caused havoc. In that case, it was in England many years ago. They said that the facility was responsible for that. But there's quite specific categories of when someone's going to be responsible to control someone else's actions. There is actually a case on appeal at the High Court at the moment around this issue. It involved a hospital who admitted someone who was having hallucinations. His friend took him into the hospital. The hospital did a psychiatric assessment and then released him, and he actually murdered his friend. So they're looking at right now whether the hospital owed a duty of care to that friend to prevent that scenario from happening, and that's at the High Court. So that will be quite an interesting case there and probably quite relevant given this sort of analogies here. But I think part of their argument there was, well, the hospital had met his friend, knew that this guy was having the hallucinations, and that because the friend had admitted his friend, that he might take that aggression out on him. So it will be interesting to see where that goes. But as it stands, aged care providers don't have to prevent their residents from harming, third persons out in the broader community.
So is that even if they're in a secure unit? Because if they're in a secure unit, then you have your duty of care to make sure that your residents stay within your secure unit.
That's, it's still the case that if they did escape, you wouldn't then necessarily be liable because they go and hurt someone else. You owe a duty of care to that person to ensure that they stay in the secure unit. So that's a slightly different thing though. So if you let them escape and they go out and hurt themselves, then you could be liable for that, and you most likely would. But it's different if they go out and walk along the road and cause a car accident and some pedestrian gets hit. You're not necessarily liable to that pedestrian. So that's really wanted to draw out of that scenario there. But did anyone have any other comments on that scenario?
What about the fact that it said that no one came to assess him in hospital? So where's the onus? Is that the onus on the respite or the aged care home that's taking him in?
Yeah, look, I think it goes towards whether they've acted reasonably. I don't think it's definitive either way, but it does sort of, I think, I don't know what your policies are, but it is best practice to go out and actually see who it is you're admitting and see what their needs are, not just rely on family and the hospital, because as you know, you don't always get that information. So I think that really goes to whether or not the aged care facility acted reasonably here. I don't think it would necessarily mean that they haven't, because it's sometimes not possible and you might be getting a lot of pressure to admit them, and the ACAS and that often will be behind that as well. So it's a relevant factor, but I wouldn't say it's definitive here to whether they've. Yeah.
In this case, should the facility have run the police because he has assaulted a resident already?
Yes, yeah.
So they should have done it straight away?
Yeah, within 24 hours, and I will be talking about the mandatory reporting stuff
That's
as
before
well.
they knew that he had severe dementia now.
But he's got dementia,
When he's
so
got dementia
they're gonna
diagnosed, then you don't
report
have to
him.
involve the police, do you?
No, there's a discretion around that, and you have to have a behaviour management plan.
Yeah.
I'll tell you about that.
The police should
We
be
don't know.
notified when they knew that he was missing
Absconded.
too.
That's right.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All right. So another way that the words, I think, duty of care come up a lot is when we're justifying restrictions on people. And this was an example I found on the Dementia Care Australia website. So a lady asked how to deal constructively with difficult behaviour. What should we do with one of our residents, a lady in her 80s who has dementia, wants to go out for a walk? She can't go on her own because she can't find her way back. We try to divert her attention, or if that doesn't work, we tell her that she can no longer walk on her own in case she gets lost. She then becomes agitated and very angry to the point of being aggressive. Some people gave some responses along the lines of staff could provide the support needed to enable the lady to go for a walk. What other responses do you think might be appropriate in this case?
Well, I'm sure most facilities have a safe area where they can walk outside.
Yep.
She's guided there and, have a walk outside within a safe area.
Yeah.
Yep.
And one of the staff can supervise at that time.
Yep.
I think even the family as well, we do encourage them to take their relatives for outings because that's what they miss on. So as facility, we have to emphasize on the importance just once in a while coming, taking them and going out with them.
Yeah. And I think that the responses were along those lines, and some people also suggested, for example, a volunteer or even a retired C9 dog could maybe guide her on her walk. But the staff member who posed the question said, we don't have time for any of that. It's my duty of care to ensure the resident's safe. I can't allow her to go for a walk. So, as you can see, that's where duty of care is often used to sort of justify that, well, let's just lock everyone up and put them in a padded cell effectively and stop them harming themselves.
Should duty of care be the less restrictive way?
Yes, and I think that's really, you've got to take the duty of care in the context of people's rights.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think, what we're seeing more and more, is an emphasis on people's rights, including disabled people. So in 2008, there was a convention by the United Nations on the rights of persons with disabilities, and it really emphasised people's rights to make decisions for themselves and the need to actually respect that. So the VLRC in its guardianship report said, there's much greater emphasis on people with disabilities being supported to be active, participating members of the community. Notions of people with disabilities as passive recipients of services are now being replaced with those of people as active citizens of communities, regardless of the nature or extent of their disabilities. And I think we see that those rights really reflected in the Charter of Rights and Responsibilities, residential care. I've just listed a few there, but I think in particular that last one, the need to accept personal responsibility for actions and choices, even though these may involve an element of risk, and not to have the risk used as a ground for preventing or restricting actions or choices. So when we're thinking about duty of care, it's really important that we have that in the back of our mind, that duty of care is not just about stopping someone from harming themselves, it's about also ensuring that they can participate and enjoy their lives.
Wasn't there an incident, I think it was last year, where a resident was found in the pond outside and the family were upset because they weren't told the truth that the resident was she was found drowned in the pond.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. They took her back inside, dried her under the bed or something.
Yeah.
Joking.
In the pond outside.
That's good.
Yeah, and I think that's that
I'm
scenario
like,
really
it's
illustrates.
not being a part of that.
It's terrible,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
How can
and
you justify that to yourself?
Someone, one of the staff looked out the top floor window and saw
Mm.
Okay.
cases.
You're going back on something.
Bizarre.
And I think that sort of really illustrates how, you know, that lady took a risk by going for a walk, and that's okay, that the facility hasn't done anything wrong necessarily there. I mean, I don't know the details of what her care plan was and whether she was wandering when she shouldn't have been, but what the problem is there is that cover-up.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you know, if they, you know, a lot of hospitals, for example, have a policy of open disclosure now, and when things go wrong, you're honest with the patient or their family, and when you don't follow that, such in that scenario, I mean, the publicity that came out is just terrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, yeah, that's it. That's a good example of where, you know, duty of care may not have been breached and there may be no cause of action, but the cover-up is really what's hurt people, I think.
It also brings to mind this pond. I mean, as far as, you know, is it something little, or, you know, there's all those rules around, that legislation around pools.
Yes.
It may not be the same thing, but depending on the size of it, that could come into it as well.
Yeah, and absolutely. And if, for example, they weren't following the regulations around that, that would be evidence that they breached their duty of care. So, yeah, it really, as I said, I'm not really sure around the details of it. But if for example, they weren't following the regulations, that would be.
The staff member was only a young girl who found her, and then she was given a sack.
Oh.
That was the issue. She was whistleblowing.
So that's that sort of victimisation of that
She
person
was
there.
one who was on
Oh. Wow.
Yeah, pretty terrible case really, and pretty much the textbook of what not to do. So, and I think all this brings us quite nicely